Thank you. So it's birthing and it is coming to a certain amount of closure, okay, that I needed to have with this study. So the title, as you can see, is not, the most traditional one. It's called From Fund to Funding to Field and Now to Findings. And however, oh, Anya, it's not working. Page down. I can't. Next. Enter. Well, technology again, but I have the young. So if that happens again, just click on the screen. And then go this way. So hit on the screen. Yep. And then, okay. Well, thank you. So, but before I move on with presenting the findings, which were published in October of last year, I would like to basically thank you all for being here, all of you who are here in person, and all of you who are watching on Zoom. And I know there are some across the different time zones, across different countries. I know there are some from England as well, and especially from Poland. And especially those without whom this study and this presentation would not have been possible. So I know that it is customary to present acknowledgements at the end of the presentation. However, I'm not a customary person, and I would like to make my acknowledgements at the beginning because I would like to thank my collaborators, co-authors, for their continued support in this whole process, without whom this would not have been possible. So I will just list their names, and I hope that as I pronounce their names, they will feel the resonance of a word thank you when I say it. Ari Stein, J-Ping He, Mary Noel, Larry Hembrock, Dorothy Nelson, Fan Vigneault, Tifu Shen, Laura Scott, Jadwiga Harzewska, Bożena Wajszczyk, Karen Clark, Leszek Rybaczyk, Bogdan Pathak, Dorota Błaszczyk, Ann Benkowski, and Walt Willett. Professor Willett has been with me on this journey since 1982-83, while the others joined me when I moved here in '95, which is by now 27 years. So this paper, which was published in October of last year, we dedicated this paper to all the women who participated in the Polish Women's Health Study and shared their life stories and life histories. And their legacy will remain in the findings of this study. So, however, bear with me for the next 4 slides, I hope, because now with this share screen, I'm finding it more difficult. The Polish Women's Health Study would not have been possible with the guidance and support of my mentors and supporters, like my project officer at NCI, Dr. Joe Patel, Professor William Hansel, many of you know of the Mantel Hansel statistic, Victoria Persky, Katie Mullen, Malcolm Pike, John Summit, Alice Whittemore, Marie Swanson, Liz Brinton, Callie Howe, and Linda Weiss. And I would like to thank my MSU colleagues, especially Dr. Holzman, who just introduced me, Joe Gardner, who is also present here, and James Trasco, who I think is right on the Zoom, for their unwavering support of this research, as well as Nigel Punnett and Bill Wadland, who were in 1994, when I came for the interview, chairs of the 2 departments of family practice and epidemiology, and who placed their trust in me and made me an offer so that I could come and be here to follow my dream. And I would like to thank the staff of both departments who unselfishly provided the needed administrative and IT support and continue to do it to this day. So there are a few other thank you notes. If I missed your name, please forgive me. However, there was one more that I would like to thank other staff members of the Polish Women's Health Study and community supporters, especially Dorothy Pathak, Dana Geisher. And I would also like to thank my husband, Dr. Dorothy Pathak, and my daughter, future Dr. Anya Pathak, who is now on her own journey of being a DO and PhD student right here at home at MSU, and for them providing me the support as I traveled from the conception of the Polish Women's Health Study to founding, to field, and now findings that were presented in this paper. So today's talk is actually divided into two parts. Part one, which is from fund to field to funding, and you will see why, which is the journey. And part two, which is finding the destination. Usually talks are about the destination. So why did I choose to divide it into two parts? Because you will witness right now what I presented in 2001 on January 26th during our first epidemiology research day. The title was From Fund to Funding to Field, and it was still missing the finding. And today, it actually gets the finding. There is very little that I changed, if I did change anything from this talk. We became the department in 1998, and this was our first epidemiology research day. So you are getting a little bit of the history as well. So by the way, Rybaczyk, which is my maiden name, RYBA Ryba means fish. So the talk has a kind of a taste of my ancestors who were probably most likely fishermen. Okay, so it will be, you will see a lot of theme about the fishes. So the first one is the bait. So what was the bait? Well, the bait was that I was, like Dr. Holzman mentioned, a co-PI from New Mexico on cancer and steroid hormone study, which was the first largest study evaluating, ran by Howard Torrey from CDC, evaluating the effect of oral contraceptives on breast cancer risk. I go on a sabbatical, and the purpose is to develop a grant proposal to study, because I had an appointment also at the New Mexico Tumor Registry, to develop a proposal that we would submit to study the increase in breast cancer incidence in New Mexico Hispanic women. But there is a serendipitous finding. I find that the breast cancer mortality in Polish-migrant women rises to the level of the host country to which they migrate. When they come to US, their mortality rises to the level of US. When they go to Wales, 2.2 times, and when they go to Australia, the SMR is literally 100, and it is only 1.7 times. So I had to decide how I'm going to proceed with it. Well, so I'm angling in different waters. I need to start focusing on how to design a study which would assess what are the likely reasons for this rapid rise in the breast cancer risk in this migrating generation. So, like I mentioned, you all have heard of Bill Hansel. He always told me, and he's the godfather, by the way, of migrant studies. He always told me, you need the three groups. You need the natives, you need the migrants, and you need the ancestry. Well, in the 1980s, that was not possible for the natives because this was a communist country, Poland, but I still could try to design a study in the US. So where do I go fishing? Well, I can't do it in New Mexico because there are very few Polish migrant women. So I have to go to Chicago, Detroit, state of Connecticut, and New York City. Well, after 4 years of investigating these sites, and believe me, I went to each one of them and met with the different researchers. Chicago, Illinois has a Illinois State Cancer Registry, and they said yes. Detroit, Hermanos Cancer Institute. But the state of Connecticut and state of New York, it's not that they did not want to participate. It's just that their electronic records could not provide me with a rapid ascertainment of cases at that time. I'm sure the story would be different right now, but mind you, this is late 1980s, okay? So I read my net, I say, okay, I have to have those SEER or state registries. And the questions though becomes, what is it that they need to provide me with? And the question becomes, is the place of birth even recorded? And if we go for the ancestry, I would have to screen all the white breast cancer cases for Polish ancestry. That is a monumental task. And then what is going to be our control selection? We went through all the pros and cons of the first three, but we all know that the random digit dialing won because this would be the population-based case control study. So, but there is a new hook over time. There is a fall of Berlin Wall, okay? So I can now go fishing for the royal fish. I all along had a connection with the Institute of Oncology in Gliwice, but I did not know anyone at Institute of Oncology in Warsaw, but connections were made. And of course, I had the Polish migrants and the Polish ancestry. So but to do the study, we have to have the money. So what happens? Well, there are two submissions from New Mexico, 92 and 93. And the 93 one, the reviewer's concern comes back and says, why the study is organized as it is with the principal investigator in New Mexico, while the major part of the study takes place in Chicago and Detroit? Well, to increase the chances of funding and address the reviewer's concern, I needed to move. And I said, I need to go fishing in the lakes. So I moved. I had an interview. There was an opening posted in 94. I applied and I was made an offer. And what a choice to come. January of 1995, January. Even my car didn't like it, okay? So, yes, from New Mexico, believe me, where there is sunshine for over 360 days per day. This was quite gloomy, okay? But it was all worth it. So there were two more submissions from MSU. When we come to a new place, we want to impress. So I submitted it right away in March. But at that time, I did not yet have the time to create connections. And it showed. So it clearly was not funded because I had to resubmit it. And by the time I resubmitted it in 1996, it was a much better organized. I had basically collaborators right here from MSU, but it was not a royal fish for the obvious reasons that to identify Polish ancestry would cost a great deal of money. So I had the 1996 submission. Clearly, my main hypothesis were dietary, And today, although we had many dietary hypotheses, I'm going to focus on the cruciferous vegetables and on the glucobrassicans and their metabolites in the individual nutrients. So the end and the beginning. So success, the 1996 submission is funded as of October 1997. Well, there is a slight problem. There is a 15% initial cut, and R1 is turned into MCI cooperative agreement, yet the intramural individuals, researchers, are interested in occupational exposures and physical activity. I'm interested in dietary. So there is an expansion to another site in Poland, Łódź. But my challenge is that when we submitted it in 96, EPT said that they already provided me a bare bone budget and they could not absorb the 15% cut. So they were responsible for interviewing in Chicago and control selection. So we had the two challenges, EPT withdrawals, and now we had to construct a study instrument that will incorporate three major hypotheses testing, dietary, occupational, and physical activity. And we all know that we don't want the questionnaire to last 5 hours. So our goal was to make it in 2 hours. I mean, let's be real. So mending the method. After we identified a replacement, and National Opinion Research Center North at University of Chicago was willing to conduct the interview. And we identified, thanks to our project officer, Gordon Research Services, which was, I think, in Maine, for random digit dialing long distance, RDD. And for the questionnaire, we had revision after revision, and we could not make it within 2 hours. It always took more than 3 hours. So the decision in 99 was separate the two questionnaires, make emphasis on diet for MSU and emphasis on environmental exposures and physical activity for NCI. So keep in mind, this is summer of 1999. So this is our content. I added the abbreviated part. Was not there in 2001, but I just wanted to show you that we abbreviated the interest that NCI had, and we made a very detailed diet assessment both in 85, 89, which was right prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and adolescent diet. So to cast the net and catch the fish, a lot of work needs to be done. Oops. I think I need to go back to this one. You have to develop the materials. You have to develop the procedures for recruitment. You have to have the study instruments that have to be bilingual, the brochure, the questionnaires, data quality, study manuals, selection and training of interviewers. But there is also a huge component of public relations activities so that you can motivate the community to actually participate in your study. You can have the best instruments, but if you don't have participants, well, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. So I had to make sure that I identify a community coordinator who is respected in the Polish community. I need to find ways to distribute the study brochures, which were at various Polish meetings and activities. I had several interviews on the Polish radio and TV stations with, the Polish-American Medical Association, the president coming on the TV interview with me. I had interviews in the Polish newspapers. I met with the Polish priests and various organizations. So I did my homework. But there was still until, so this is summer. But in August, I get a phone call from Gordon Research Center to come and meet with them. And they tell me on site that they're going bankrupt, that they are bankrupt. and they identified by August 8 controls. So now I have a challenge in the US. I need to now find another site. Well, we were fortunate. We came right here at home to Ipser. Cost us a little more, but it was right here at home, and Dr. Larry Pembroke was PI, and Clarence Card was the project director, and it has worked splendidly. Success at last. So that's the US, but there is Poland also. So I couldn't believe it, but on September 1st, 1999, which is the 60th anniversary of World War II, I get this amazing letter from the PI at the Warsaw Institute of Oncology that they are withdrawing from the study because they're not interested in dietary hypothesis. So what am I left with? I have challenges at home here, and I have challenges in Poland. Now, I don't even have a site in Poland. But as you all know, evolution happens. We were scheduled to go in September to test the instruments. And Aristine, Mary Noel, and a few others, we still went. And we traveled to some local centers, like I already mentioned that I already had contacts in Gliwice. And they returned, but I stayed on. And I did more traveling, and I ended up with 5 centers who were willing to participate in my study, and here they are. Professor Korzewska at the National Institute of Food and Nutrition was always the PI for the whole of Poland, but then we identified in Gliwice, Bruno Zemła, Katowice, Anna Kozaczka, Poznań. We had 2 sites, Maria Kaszubowska, and open Dariusz Godlewski, and in Białystok, Piotr Żurawski. September, we did it. And what is the progress? By December, so hardly in 2 months, we already had a first organizational meeting in Warsaw, and then we had interviewer training, and by the end of 2000, we were rolling in Poland. The next slide is actually what I added. I could not resist. I asked Poland if they have any pictures from our interviewer training in Poland. And here are the 2 pictures that were sent. We had all the PIs, we had the project directors, and we had the 2 interviewers for each side. So in other words, we had at least 10 interviewers, and it all went well. So we were all set up. So this is by January of 2001. We already moved on in Cook County and in Detroit. We had already quite a few control interviews and case interviews. And that's where the 2001 ends. There were a few more, but do I have any advice for you? Keep your sense of humor was what was in 2001. But I added in commitment on this rocky road, because the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes is a train, but sometimes it can be a daylight, okay? And everything takes longer than you expect, so triple how long it will take, and then get a real timeline, and notice that 70 plus 40 plus 50 does not add up to 100%, okay? So now to findings. Okay, so what are some of the dietary hypotheses? As you know, from the title of the paper, cabbage and sauerkraut consumption in adolescence and adulthood, which was published in October of last year. We hypothesized that reduced intake of these cruciferous vegetables and their individual nutrients and non-nutritive components could lead to an increased risk of breast cancer in Polish women, both in US as well as in Poland. So why focus on cruciferous vegetables? And for Polish study on cabbage, because we didn't have broccoli, okay? In US at that time, a lot of research was done on broccoli. We didn't even know what broccoli is in the late 80s, okay? We only had cabbage. So cabbage is a member of brassica vegetables, which contains glucosinolates. Of course, now the world is very different. And the breakdown products include the indole tricarbonyl, its digestive enzyme, diindolyl methane, and isothiocyanates. And that's why isothiocyanates comes in, because that is more relevant to broccoli, okay? All of which have been shown to have anti-carcinogenic properties both in vitro, and there are a lot of researchers who have in the early 90s done research on the in vitro as well as in vivo studies. So why did I focus? Because it's a cultural food, okay, in Poland. Consumption of cabbage and sauerkraut is high, about 30 pounds per year per capita. And while in US, it's only like 10. So if following migration, there is a reduced consumption, that could contribute to the increased risk in Polish migrant women. And I'm just giving you kind of a summary. This is from a paper, Cruciferous Vegetables and Cancer Prevention. And you can see there are many pathways through which these compounds have the anti-carcinogenic properties, okay? But I want you to really pay attention to these two animal studies, okay? So the first one is oral intubation with indole tricarbonyl before a single dose prior to carcinogen treatment reduce the incidence and multiplicity of these DMBA-induced mammary tumors by as much as 70 to 80%, okay? And then repeated administration of DIM during the promotion stage. So in other words, the rats are first induced with DMBA for the mammary tumor genesis, and that inhibited tumor growth in rodents by as much as 95%. So this is, these are animal studies, these are animal models. So now back to my study, keep that in mind. And of course, you all know I had the 2 cancer registries. Oops. Yeah. So the challenge was, of course, to identify Polish-born. Why? Because at the Illinois State Cancer Registry, place of birth was actually available on about 70% of the cases, while in Detroit, hardly on 10% of the cases. So we had a lot of screening to do of all the white breast cancer cases, being in touch with them and find out and trying to obtain the information on their place of birth. The response rates for Cook County, about 77%, and I think you can understand why, because we were able to reach them more quickly, and then in Detroit, about 57%. For control, I just would like you to see the magnitude of the work that was done by IPSER. They were matched in 5 years and place of residence to the cases. So we had to call approximately 30,000 household phone numbers in order to identify 429 women, of which 27 were determined to be eligible and agreed to participate in our study, okay? And each call, on the average, each phone number took about 4 calls. Our protocol was that numbers were, removed from a roster if we could not get in touch with someone after 12 calls, but the average was about 4. In Detroit, because although it has more of the Polish ancestry, it doesn't have as many Polish-born population as Chicago does. We had to call about 23,000 household phone numbers in order to identify 100 eligible women, of which 75 agreed to participate. So IPSER did an amazing amount of work. But we had to supplement for the 65 to 79-year-old controls through the HICFA rosters, and in Cook County, we added additional 115 in Detroit, 34, and the two response rates. So you have to hear this because Karen Clark and I have a joke about it. She said that after many chocolate bars, as you all know, I love chocolate, and many meetings, when we arrived at this response rate, I finally had the green light because I was able to account for every person in my study, okay? I finally had the green light to start focusing on writing up this paper, okay? So, but as we all know, when we eat food, when we eat vegetables, the bioactive compounds are dependent on production chain, on cultivation, industrial processing, and domestic cooking, okay? And in a paper published by Decker and Berker, they made a big point about it. So in a cabbage, inclusive as vegetables, the glucosinolates and the enzyme myrosinase remain in the separate subcellular compartments throughout the plant. And it is only about the damage, chewing or cutting it like for sauerkraut, that the glucosinolates are broken down by this enzyme myrosinase into a complex. I mean, not just the ones that I'm talking about, into a complex variety of bioactive compounds. So during cooking, myrosinase is inactivated, and the estimates of the available bioactive compounds range anywhere from a low of 7% to a high of 80%, and it all depends on the duration of cooking. However, those two, hold on, did I miss something? So, yes, I think I missed. So in our analysis, we grouped cabbage products into the raw, short cooked, and long cooked. And in case those accounting for the availability of bioactive compounds. Yes, I missed, but I need to go back because what I missed is really important. Because that gives you a motivation why we adapted the approach, that's it, for data analysis. So these two, Decker and Berker, in 2003 published this paper. And this is a simulation study. They simulated a cohort where they said, yes, if we can account for all the variability, we're going to observe a significant effect in the high versus low consumption. And 400 grams per week is about 4 servings. Each serving has about 100 grams. But if we just are not able to account for any of the variability, just take the total, then we don't observe any effect. However, if we just account for the cooking, we still can observe, obviously not as significant, but still a significant effect of the high consumption versus the low, and that is the approach that we took. So now back to this, that we grouped our into raw, short cooked, and long cooked. And those we accounted for bioavailability, and our data analysis, after cleaning, we had 131 cases and 284 controls. Although these findings were actually presented in 2005 and were chosen for press release, they were based on 145 cases and 301 controls. So you can see that in the process of cleaning, several cases and several controls were eliminated. And that's what I needed, but our results remain the same. So the first one, I'm not going to go and explain to you what is along the sides, because I think all of you can see it. Do I have the ability? Yes. I just want you to notice that if we look at the total consumption at age of 12 to 13, okay, you can see that for the total, we observed a prospective effect in the highest category relative to the low. And then also if we do the trend, we observe it But I want you to know that about 70%, over 70% of the total is actually raw and short cooked. Okay, so if we look at raw and short cooked, we observed again a significant protective effect, and we do not observe protective effect for the long cooked. And then in adulthood, we observe it for, although there was a protective effect, which did not reach statistical significance in the high consumption, but reached the statistical significance in the raw and short cooked. But this is my pride and joy, this slide. So raw and short cooked, joint consumption, okay? So I want you to first focus. So our reference category is low, adolescent and adult low consumption. And then I want you to focus on this, on the 0.23, one right bottom cell, this 0.23, okay? So basically what it says, that the joint adolescent adult high consumption versus low is protective. It provides significant reduction in breast cancer risk. It's also ratio, okay, of 0.23, yet the confidence interval ends in 0.65. I'll take it any time, even if I only get 35% reduction, okay? But I also want you to look at the bottom row, the two. Although the low-high, which is probably, we don't have that many women in there, the point estimates stay about the same, between 0.27 and 0.23. And the medium and high, medium in adulthood and high in adolescence. So what it says, that if you are a high consumer in adolescence, then you get a protection basically for a lifetime. But not all is lost. If you are a high consumer in adulthood, notice that the same thing happened. Could there be two processes that are happening for these cruciferous vegetables? Okay, and here we go. I'm placing these results, these patterns that I observed in the context of multistage, multi-mechanism concept of carcinogenesis. We have initiation, promotion, and progression. Initiation is the irreversible alteration of the single normal cells, which then accumulates the DNA in it. However, promotion is a potentially reversible clonal expansion of the single initiated cell if we can provide anti-promoters at that time. And then progression is the irreversible conversion of a single initiated cell that metastasizes and invades. So, conclusion, public health relevance. Our findings in adolescence. What did we observe? We observed pattern of reduction in breast cancer risk about 70% with high consumption, which, on the simulated cohort, it was only for the high, with high consumption of raw short cooked by accounting for bioavailability, cabbage sauerkraut. Could this indicate that the breakdown products of glucosinolates can affect the initiation stage of carcinogenesis by decreasing the number of initiated cells? Well, do we have anything in animal studies that would tell us the same story? Well, we do, because that's why I wanted you to remember, because similar pattern was observed that oral intubation in a single dose prior to carcinogen treatment reduced the incidence and multiplicity of VMDA-induced mammary tumors in rats by 70 to 80%. What about public health relevance from our adult observations? Well, we observed a pattern of reduction, again about 70%. Now, could this now indicate that the breakdown products of glucosinolates can affect promotion phase of carcinogenesis by acting as anti-promoters? High consumption with an anti-promoter, you have to have a threshold, and you have to be given repeatedly and consistently over time. And what did we observe in animal studies? We observed the same pattern, that the repeated oral administration of DIM during the promotion stage induced, during the promotion stage of the DMBA-induced mammary tumorigenesis inhibited tumor growth by as much as 95%. So, as a good epidemiologist, I want you to read the last one, but I'll start on the top. These findings contribute to the growing literature suggesting a protective effect of a potentially modifiable factor, cruciferous vegetables intake. However, I do believe that the consumption has to be culturally specific, okay? I don't think I'm going to get everyone to start eating sauerkraut like I brought for you and coleslaw, but who knows? Maybe we can impact, teenagers do like coleslaw in US and in adulthood, and we could contribute to the reduction and to breast cancer risk. However, like I said, as a good epidemiologist, more studies are needed, okay? Especially longitudinal studies, which will take into account adolescent diet to corroborate these findings. And thank you for being here and listening. And we did not have much meat, okay? So meat was rarity. That's why when we came to United States, so I didn't put in that slide, but what are the implications for the migrants based on this study? When we come to another country and we observe an increase in risk, we want to go right there and blame it on something, right? But maybe we need to think about, did we give up anything that used to protect us from where we came? And what happens then, we give up that something, we create a void, and then we replace it by the things that we really like, which is a lot of sausage, like you say. So it is all, you're right, it is all a combination of things. And because of all the literature and the effects of the various compounds of the cruciferous vegetables, that's where my focus was.
My question really is, we know that fat has some effect on breast cancer, right?
Well, that hypothesis,
there, right?
That hypothesis.
So in your study, did you control that factor?
Oh, yes. That hypothesis, though, has been little debunked on several other studies. By the way, that's where I started my original hypothesis, because in the early 80s, the original hypothesis were for fat, increase in fat consumption.
Right.
But then the fat hypothesis, based on all the meta-analysis and so on, were actually shown that they don't hold. So, but at the same time, in the early 90s, there was a lot of activity about the compounds in cruciferous vegetables at Johns Hopkins, Paul Talalay, and others. And that is what actually I changed my main hypothesis for the study from the dietary fat to the cruciferous vegetables.
We want to ask the Zoom audience if they have any questions.
Yes, I would hope that you can ask any questions you would like. I don't know, you can unmute yourself. I can see Darius, I can see Jim, Trusco, I can see all of you. It's wonderful. Thank you for being here and taking the time. And Ellen, yes.
I think Jim has his hand up.
Jim, do you have a question?
I do have a question. I had some sound trouble, so I may have missed this. And if you talked about it before, other parts of the world where they eat uncooked and fermented cabbage, South Korea, for example, or do you see the same kind of patterns of findings, or has anybody scanned the diet patterns across the world? You'd expect in China there also would be uncooked fermented cabbage. And I wonder if you get variations in the rates across other parts of the world besides Poland.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is, of course, Korea with kimchi. And from what I understand, and this actually comes from Jan Summit, he knew someone who was doing that study, but it wasn't published. So I don't know what they found. Okay.
Great.
And then, just like mine, it took, 13 years to be published. So it all takes time. Maybe one day it will show up. But
great talk. Thanks a lot.
But then with China, there have been studies reporting protective effect, and it isn't just for breast cancer. For lung cancer, for stomach cancer, the consumption of cruciferous vegetables, and they do eat a lot of cabbage.
Great. Thanks. Great talk.
Thank you.
Dorothy.
Yes.
First, congratulations for your dogged persistence. Any common variety scientists would have long given up with all the challenges you took. But in any case, I do want to follow up on that last point, since I have lived in Korea for several years, and we know everybody, including me, ate kimchi 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I still eat it. I here in East Lansing and go to the Asia market and I eat kimchi every day. On top of that, my mother was a professional Hungarian cook, and our favorite meal was the cabbage strudel. And obviously the influence of the Austria-Hungarian diet spread from not only Hungary, but all the surrounding areas. So I would also like to know if any epidemiologist has seriously looked at the role of kimchi and other cabbage-based diet. And with regard to the Chinese, there is one study that I know of, I cite it quite often, the role of the red cabbage mold that caused and was associated with esophageal cancer. That mold produces a powerful tumor promoter, like the croton oil in the croton plant is a tumor promoter. So I do know that with the prevalence of kimchi in the diet in the Koreans, both there and here in the United States, has got to have some role, because kimchi not only has the cabbage part, but it also has all those pepper spices and other things that have been shown to be correlated with reduction of cancers in certain organs. So
I am going to reach out to Jonathan Summit, because I know when he was at Johns Hopkins, he told me that he was aware of someone who was doing that in Korea. And I just would like to ask him if it has been published already. But that simulation study that I quoted was very interesting. I reviewed it last night because, I wanted to make sure that I'm not misquoting it. But, he hypothesized, that you have this presumably, protective effect depending on the bioavailability of what you consume. And then and then it's going to breast cancer. And then he had another arrow, which he called fate factor. And the fate factor is whether you will or you will not get breast cancer. Because obviously, even in my population, I had women who were high consumers in both time periods, and they still ended up with breast cancer. Otherwise, I would not have been able to estimate the odds ratio. But there was another fate factor that cabbage consumption did not overcome, and they became cases. So there are other, obviously, it's not a magic bullet, like I said, but it is one avenue. If you can to reduce your risk. So why not take that road? Especially if you liked my endless coleslaw, or that you liked it, or the cabbage, the sauerkraut salad, either one. Anybody else from the Darius? I can see you. Ellen, Larry, Edvika.
Dorothy, I don't really have a question, but I did want to commend you. I thought it was a really nice presentation. I think it's important to, especially for the students coming up, to recognize that things aren't always as simple as they seem. Oftentimes there are a lot of challenges that you have to encounter and overcome in order to get things done the way they need to be done. Our role was in actually trying to control cases using random digit dial, but it wasn't a straight random digit dial. It took some invention on our part to try to stay within budgetary constraints. So it seemed like a Herculean task, even as you described it, but that was the most efficient way to do it. And we had to invent the efficient way. So even things that are well accepted methodological approaches oftentimes involve some creativity in order to overcome the challenges, in order to live within your means.
So basically, I didn't have time to say that, but there is a density of the population. So we divided the census tracts into high, medium, and low densities. And the cut points for those densities differed in Chicago versus Detroit. That's why the Detroit. And then we basically did not take the census tracts that were yield to identify controls from there. We just could not afford make random digit dialing into those particular census tracts. So I think that's how we lost some of the cases, because then I deleted some of the cases who were from census tracts from which we did not have control population. So yes, Dr. Hembroff came up with a very creative way of identifying of doing random digit dialing that focused mainly on that covered, I think in both places, we covered, Larry, I think about at least 95% in each one of the Polish population, Polish-born population. So we might not have obtained controls from about 5% of the potential population. But you have to do what you have to do to remain in the budget. We could not have done it otherwise. And like I said, there was no time to mention all those these were big cobblestones, but believe me, there were also lots of little cobblestones. Oh, anybody else?
Dorothy, question? Oh, good to hear everybody's voices. Do you have time, or are we well over?
Well, we are about 10 minutes over, but it all depends on them. I have time. So if anybody else needs to leave.
Just quickly, good to hear voices of different people from when I was there, but just to echo that it's just so good to hear that your passion came through and the incredible perseverance to what it takes to put together a study like that. And then a question, I think I might have missed it, but can you talk a little bit about whether you think the effects of acculturation were fully taken into account?
There could be more, but I adjusted for duration of stay in the United States. So the longer they were here, the more acculturated. So this was I did not do stratified analysis, but I just did it as an adjustment in the model. And it was, because in 1985, 89, some of these individuals were still in Poland. So the three categories were in Poland, between 0 and 10 years in United States, and then more than 10 years in United States by 1985-89. So I'm sure, we collected all sorts of information, language used, types of stores that you go to, Polish and so on, but we did not have the time to incorporate all of that as a acculturation index besides the duration of stay.
Future, much more to publish on.
Yes, that is future. Now that, as I call it, the data set is squeaky clean after all those chocolate bars with Karen Clark. I think I can move forward. And yes.
Dorothy, congratulations. There's a lot of overlap in the risks between cancer and coronary disease. And there are a lot of studies that have looked at immigrants from Ireland and other places that coming to the United States have increased the risk of heart attacks. I wonder if you saw any of that in your database or have had a chance to look at that.
No, I don't have that information. However, I do have to tell you that when the study was just starting, actually, Dr. Patel, my NCI project officer, told me, why don't you go and try to look at cardiovascular disease in your population? And of course, I was so overwhelmed at that time that I did not follow up on his advice. But yes, I totally agree with you. And, I think we all realize that inflammation is a common risk factors for a lot of diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease.
I think we both know what that
Yes.
inflammation is being caused by.
Yes, I know. Dr. Abela and we collaborate on a paper that we are just about to submit, and it is looking at I cannot spill the beans, so only you can spill the beans, if you want to say it. Because it is, it's looking basically at the connections, and there are many factors that are common, and between cancer and cardiovascular disease. Any other questions?
Dorothy, just one other comment, just to follow up on this. One of the current modulators of factors that could influence cancer of any organ, up or down, is now the microbiome. And obviously eating anything, including cabbage, is going to be acted on by the microbes in the individual's gut. And here, that may explain many outliers, as well as maybe some results that would counter your hypothesis. So today, the microbiome is being added to studies that epidemiologists are doing and cell biologists and cancer biologists are doing. So this is an important factor, and it should be taken into account today, just to bring in where modern science is going.
It's absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. I actually am in touch with someone at NCI who is doing, when she does the DNA extraction, she can actually, but it's a different process for the DNA extraction that I am doing versus the DNA extraction that would help her to identify, and she's not doing it in buccal cells like I have. She's doing it more, I think, in the tissue. So, but I have talked to her. She went on maternity leave. When she comes back, we are going to pursue it because she felt that I could, since some of my DNA has not yet been isolated, that I could look into it in my study. So, but you know, all of these take a lot of commitment and money to do it. And that means applying for grants and then being funded. And the situation right now is very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I again want to thank you all for coming and spending, you know, over an hour of your time and listening to my story, and a story that I hope you keep in mind as you embark on your future careers, because I want you to know that that light could be the daylight. Don't always think of it as a train.